Walters speaking, and I've lived in this district of Petersfield, north of Selkirk, about 33 miles north of Winnipeg for the last 63 years, and lived amongst the descendants of the Selkirk settlers, so I've listened to their conversation and decided that they at one time had a dialect that is not in use today. So having heard about this over the years, I thought I would explain it to on this tape. But afterwards, I have, from my experience amongst the people, I've written 5 episodes of a man's daily work going around his farm, done in the dialect of the Red River called Bungee. It was a name of the Indians that Miles MacDonnell encountered on the Netley River here, or the River of Death, when they came up in 1812 from Hudson Bay, and he called them the Bungee Indians, although they were Sotus from the American states. They're American Indians, and a mixture of Cree as well. And this here first episode will be on the other side of this tape of my stories. But first of all, I'll explain a little bit about this Bungee. This is a story of a dialect which developed among the Selkirk settlers, the Hudson Bay Company's employees and the former employees of the Northwest Company, which joined the Hudson Bay in 1821. And others who lived in the settlement were the independent traders, the Métis, the soldiers discharged from the Upper Lawrence and the Lower Fort Garrys, who became settlers, and of course the children born of the mixed marriages between the Indians and the whites. Bungee, sometimes spelled B-U-N-G-Y or B-U-N-G-I, I spell it here B-U-N-G-E-E, the same as MacDonnell did, is a name given to this dialect. And this name appears to have been used first by Miles MacDonnell, an agent of Lord Selkirk in charge of establishing a colony along the Red River. MacDonnell, in a letter to Selkirk, stated that a group of Indians living beside the river were the Sotu, or Bungee Indians. At this time, the Indians called this river the Napuseni, meaning River of Death, or actually it means sleeping river, like in death. Several different tribes had occupied the same territory, according to Indian legend. One of these tribes, the Ottawas, were wiped out by disease. It was probably smallpox, as smallpox epidemics were known to have occurred in this area and out west too. And the latest one in 1877, the next was down at Gimli, where a lot of Icelandic people, settlers, died there. The next people to settle in this location were called Pananis, and they called the river by the same name, Napuseni, and they in turn were massacred by a wandering band of Sioux. The Ojibways, pronounced Ojibwe, the Crees, and the Sotu were among those MacDonnell encountered by the River of Death. The Sotu, or as MacDonald called them, the Bungees, were really natives of the present state of Minnesota. One member of this tribe, who was old man in 1912, when he related the following to the present writer, said that when he was a very young child, he was placed behind a bale of pemmican for protection from flying arrows during one of these Sioux raids, or attacks. As the Indians usually fought a hit-and-run kind of an attack and very seldom did any fighting past the noon hour, the Sotu were able to get away. And they established themselves on this river when they came across the border. They actually came up from Sault Ste. Marie, and their chief was Peguis. Today, this river is called the Netley River, and its banks show little trace of its former occupants. The shore is lined by summer cottages and summer camps, surrounded by flower beds and lawns. Gone, too, are the log houses where the friendly natives sheltered settlers during the Métis uprising led by Louis Riel in 1869. Some of them lived in dugouts along this creek under the guidance of that Omaskupanes. He was called Red Thunder in Indian, and he was the chief of these Sotus, and he sheltered some of the Selkirk settlers here on the bank. An early traveler wrote in his journal that he encountered natives growing corn where the big timber starts, a number of leagues upstream from where the Netley River empties into the Red River, the River of Mud, or Winnipeg. Winnipeg, as the Indians called it, and meant turbulent water, but some people have construed the meaning to mean muddy water. There's really no proof of that. No trace of these corn patches remain. At first, Bungee was spoken by the people living along the Red River north of the Forks, when the Red and the Assiniboine rivers meet, the present site of Winnipeg. Later on, as people navigated the lakes and the rivers to the north and the south and to the west, the dialects came into use more in remote areas after the influx of many new settlers bringing with them their own native tongues. This unique speech gradually fell out of use, and today one hears the dialect only in communities bordering Lake Winnipeg and points further north. In the early days, children in the settlement did not have formal schooling, and they simply repeated what they heard from their parents and other adults. Slight changes in the language did occur, however, especially as the second generation of settlers grew to adulthood. The second development resulted in very distinct dialect, Bungee, or Red River lingo as they call it. The people who grew up in this environment spoke softly and pleasantly in a pattern resembling that of a native Indian language, which is picturesque and musical. Basically, Bungee is composed of native Indian words and modified English words, and French. Friends and relatives, for example, Nushishin for granddaughter, Nietzsche for brother, and Nistau for brother-in-law, and a female cousin is called Mininushe, while a male cousin is called Nanitowis. Native names are also used for certain commonly used articles, and for plants, for example, a rogan is a birch bark basket or pail, Saskatoon is a wild berry, and Ipiminan is a high bush cranberry that the Indians called it, and Makusiminan is a low bush variety, and the settlers spoke of these two types of cranberries as nippies, and when they boil them up they call it nippy jam. And pemmican is dried buffalo meat and grease and berries mixed in by pounding it into powder. Mindaman also is an Indian word, and it is the Indian native colored corn. The Hudson Bay Company gave pieces of wood instead of cash for furs, and these pieces were of various sizes, with each size having a different value. They were called casters, a term probably derived from castor, a term referring to a young beaver. These and many more words, such as peamy for crooked, and peaked for thin, and gutter or mud and gutter for anything dirty, were all a part of the daily conversation, and ki bakate in Soto tongue also meant thin. Old world words, some of them now listed as obsolete, were also in use then, and one of these was slock, from the Scotch word slocken, meaning to put out a light or a fire, and mooter, meaning to barter or trade goods, was another word the Scotch people brought over. There are also many words similar to the English words, even though different spellings and pronunciations are used and letters are omitted. A few of these are medicine for medicine, daughter for daughter, and separate for separate, ceased for deceased, that is, a person is dead, and neighbor for neighbor, stubborn for stubborn, and opsite for opposite. The Y was left off words beginning with a Y, thus yesterday became esterday, and on the other hand, letters were sometimes added, as in along, they put an E on the end. Vowels were often exchanged, as in the example, daughter, separate, and neighbor, given above. Omission of certain letters was frequent, as illustrated by medicine, ceased, and opsite. Some changes seem to occur to simplify pronunciation because the letter X, for example, was hard to pronounce. A word such as expected would sound like expected, and the combination of two letters like SH in the word should was pronounced should, but such became suts, and much became muts. This change was typical of words ending in CH. In other instances, the CH or the H might be omitted. Sunshine, they would say sunshine. Perhaps this occurred because the native tongue has fewer consonants than the English, and because words containing letters which are not pronounced at all, or are not pronounced as one might expect in the English language. You leave off some letters like umble, it starts with an H and you say umble, and things like that. A similar occurrence can be seen in the word wood, which is pronounced wood. For wood cut in a stove length, we have a stove length billet or wood. That's the way the old timers would say it. That is a piece of wood cut up to fit the stove. In another type of example, ist for just, we can see both consonant omission and vowel change. For J, they would say DS, making John and James, Zan and James. Other examples show that the substitution of entire words also occurred. To show possession of an article, people would say, I am got, or I'm got, instead of I have. Words order also showed a change. A statement in the negative would be spoken, I not can do it, instead of saying I cannot do it. Repetitions were common. For example, I was born in St. Andrews. In St. Andrews, that's where I was born. Or, that's what he said when he said that to me. The word says was used many times in a sentence. For example, I says sounds like S-E-Z. I says to him, I says, and he says to me. The word like was used for emphasis and to show that a statement is final, as that's the way it is like, and taking one thing with another like, or as the old-timers would say it, that's the way it is like, and taking one thing with another like on the average like. For one, they would say own, that is sounds like one, and for she, they would say sa, and sa said to me, see? It is interesting, too, to note that a common practice among the people was to call a male she and a female he. I don't know if he's going up, that's what they'd say, and when they're talking about his wife. Some idea of this dialect can be gained from the following paragraph from one of my yarns of yesteryear series, written in modified dialect. The man has undertaken a mission he must accomplish, and he is to deliver a load of wood to Fort Garry, some distance away, and he is anxious to be off. But because he plans to pick up a load of hay on the way back, he can't afford to waste any time, and he decides to take a neighbor, or a neighbor, they say, along to talk to. The following is part of the conversation between the two men after he arrived at John James's place, or John James's place. See, that place would sound like P-L-E-Y-A-S, place. This is part of the story that's on the other side of this tape of my first yarn about the man on his farm, called This Is What I'm Thinking, but this is one he picked up his neighbor to go and deliver that load of wood. My trip to the bush come off all right. My luck hold out this time. And I found John James is finishing up his chores. He says to ma, you see that me, they say ma, bye, are you going up? That word bye is B-Y-E, doesn't mean boy like some of them now say boy, boy, boy. They use that as an expression. But this is an expression they use, B-Y-E, bay. Are you going hopping? Then are you going up to town? He says. And that's what I'm here for, he says, to get you to come along. They put an E on the end of along. Are you game to do that, I says. Sure, he says. I'm not nothing special to do anyhow, he says. So you might as well as take a ride with you. Well, if you has time to, you may just as well as two. Or ist as well as two, they would say. I told him. So he comes running. He's not got no body to wave to, because his deceased wife, his wife died, you see, left him on a stormy day, and when she laid down, she told him, so I would see him later on. That's if he ever gets away there. That meant that if he ever got to heaven, she might see him there, but you didn't expect him to get there very much. Now, what you have just read in the brief study is a brief study of the way the early Red River settlers conversed in the settlement north of the Forks. That is, the forks of the Red River and the Assiniboine that joined together at Winnipeg, where the first settlement started. Much has been written about the Selkirk settlers and the descendants, all of who depended upon one another in order to survive. As the times were very trying during lean times and hardships caused by crop failures and flooding, they and the others developed into a hardy people able to cope with whatever the conditions were. They were self-reliant and creative. This was evidenced in their construction of the Red River cart, the flail for thrashing grain, and the cradle, for harvesting their crops. They also developed storage of food for winter when canning and refrigeration were unknown. Besides this, they made their own homespun clothes and yarn. It must also be remembered that all through the years of colonization in North America, the native Indian taught the white settlers many things which helped them to adjust to life in the wilds, how to make use of nature's gifts and how to build water craft from materials found in the wood, and how to dry wild berries, which in the case of Saskatoon make good currants, how buffalo meat could be jerked or dried into pemmican, to say nothing of the remedies and recipes they shared with the whites, remedies made from herbs and roots of plants and which saved many a life in pioneer days when medical aid was non-existent. Living beside a river as these settlers did, they were always sure of a meal of fish. In those days, the sturgeon were plentiful. Stories are told of a sturgeon so big that 4 men carried one up the riverbank, its body over their shoulders, but its tail still dragging on the ground behind them. With such an abundance of game birds and big game around, the Red River settlers were able to take things as they came. One such thing was the long, cold winters, but they kept snug in their log houses with a fire crackling in their old Karen stove. This was when the women did their weaving and the spinning as they talked with their neighbors about the many things that were going on about them. Meanwhile, their men were out hauling hay or perhaps cutting firewood in the bush. And when spring came and the creeks were running, they would go down to John Tate's mill to get some grain crushed into flour. Some of the wheat was cracked just enough to make the porridge called bustin'. Roasted first and then boiled, many an old-timer today talks about it as being mighty healthy stuff. That John Tate's mill was down in Parkdale, and the story on another tape here I made about that, and when the old fellow wandered away to die. Among these people, their way of life centered around their church. Their sure and total belief in their God developed in them a certain calmness. They believed that their destiny was in his hands, and this belief, coupled with their sense of good, clean fun and rest at the proper times, helped many of them to live to be a ripe old age. The narrow lots once laid out so that each family could be close together on the riverbanks are being taken up now by people moving out from Winnipeg, where once a man's lot was 4 miles long and 1 or 2 chains wide. A chain is 110 feet. Now there are upwards of 20 houses on such a lot. There are still sons and daughters of early settlers living here in the district of St. Andrews, but very few. Some of these are in their 90s, and 2 or 3 are over 100. And these are the ones who can talk of the old days when Winnipeg was only starting up. They can tell you about the buffalo hunt, but alas, for them the dim days of remembrance are fast fading away, and soon pioneering and pioneers will be something only to be read about in books. The following is a centennial project titled Yarns of Yesteryears, a Red River Saga featuring stories depicting the life of a settler, written and narrated by Frank J. Walters at Petersfield, Manitoba, April 1967. This series of yarns of yesteryears are designed to give the listener some idea of the way of life as it was in the settlement bordering the Red River north of the present city of Winnipeg some 100 years ago, making them sound as if one man is telling you of his work, his social life, and that of his friends, his hopes, his desires, and in a way, his troubles and sorrows. They contain all the phrases and use of words commonly in use in the days of which I write, gleaned from my personal contact with the people who are descendants of the original settlers whose memory goes back 90 years and more. This work is non-fictional, based on fact as much as possible, using the dialect natural to the people living in this district at that time, with a little bit of rural philosophy added. And the personal and non-personal episodes contained in these stories are hand-me-downs which have been circulating for years in the district, and are included to add a touch of human interest to the telling. The dialect is a mixture of Cree, Soto, and European tongues brought about by the mixed marriages and lack of schooling, because the offspring from these marriages had no other way of learning anything except by imitating others. They gradually evolved a way of expression peculiar to this district alone, and at times they called a female he and a male she. They put together sentences which to them made sense, often repetitious. They had certain traits of character born of the stoic resourcefulness and cunning of the Indian and the stolid thriftiness of the European settlers. The life they led was unhurried and sincere. Most of them believed that what is to be will be, and let it go at that. Their belief in the Bible was their prime concern. Thus they led quiet lives, and apart from having to carve for themselves a living in a wild new country, life for them rolled along smoothly. Their main enjoyment was to get together and visit, and often the visit lasted overnight due to the distances between houses and the method they had of travel, usually an ox cart. On these occasions, and wherever people got together, they would be able to swap yarns and discuss news of everything that took place from one end of the settlement to the other. And so today, amongst the old people now living, remember things they heard when but a child. Their memories take them back to what they call the good old days, and comparing them with the topsy-turvy world of today, I suspect they were. There are a few words used in these tales which you may not be familiar with, so the following is a list of some of them. And any similarity of names or places used in these yarns is purely incidental and not by design. Number one in this series is called This Is What I'm Thinking. Now this is the word list. Neepy jam is cranberries with the pips left in. Apachiquani means upside down. Yanasi is an Indian word meaning do you see or like that. And shamunk is splashing noise like a stone thrown in the water. Macamina is an Indian word meaning a sweet biscuit with currants or dried saskatoons and sugar added. Kipits is mischievous in Indian and means willful or bad. Bustin is a homemade cereal made of burnt wheat and cooked like porridge. Peaked is sickly or thin. Peamy is crooked or slanting. Kitchen sweat, a dance in the house. Lengthwood, poles not sawn up. And billets is stove wood sawn short. Schlock means to put out a fire or a lamp. Weekus is the roots of a marsh plant used as medicine and rat food. Hard grease is rendered deer fat. Musquash, a muskrat. Muniash is a white man in Cree. And wapush, or bush puppy, is a wild rabbit. This is what I'm thinking.
It's a kind of dirty out this morning. So after feeding up at the stable, I was sitting along the stove having a worm, and downing my second plate of busting and thick cream. It's a little on the burnt side, I thought. I hope she has better luck with her next bet, and not to burn it so much. This is what I'm thinking. When all at once there comes a knock on the door. So I says to the missus, "See who's that?" And this is my neighbor Jamsy now. So I says to him, "Come, sit in. There's lots of tea." But right away he says to me, "I'm got no time. I'm got a sick cow, and I can't get 'em up by." That's what he said when he said that to me. So I says to him, "Hold on now. I'll get on my hat and coat and come along with you and take a look-see." Now all this is in the late springtime, you see. The wind a whistling and fairly blowing us off on our feet. and nigh on taking our breath away. We're up to our knees in gutter in places, and it's tough going, but it keeps to the lee of the bus as best we can, till it comes to the gully leading up to James's place, and about opposite all Aunt Janet. And as we're passing, she calls out to me to call along my way back and take a fresh bannock for me and the missus, made with hard grease. By, that's what's good along with Neepy jam. On our way up now, James is telling me about his missus. He's over to Maggie Town, giving Maggie Jack a hand, cleaning up her new addition. Seems like Maggie Jim has one, so Maggie Jack has to have one too. Oh, I says. And I suppose if it's a girl, she'll call it Maggie, same as her mother. No, James, he says it's her new lean-to I'm talking about. A place to store one stuff on another, and to put shelves in, gives more room for sitting in the kitchen. Oh, I says, that's kind of an addition. I'm thinking now, wait till my missus hears about this. I'll not get no peace until he has an addition, same as I have over to Maggie Town. When we comes to the stable, and here's his cow standing up now, and calling to us. You're got a fine animal, I says, but she looks a little peaked to me, I says. So I goes up close, and I could see these big black fellas crawling around at the top end of his tail and down around his neck. Then I knowed right away what the trouble was, 'cause I had an animal had them once, but a different kind. I think he caught them off on the chickens, for they're always scratching. So I says to Jamesy, in a joke I says to him, maybe your cow caught them off of you. Anyhow, rub 'em down with some goose grease, and she'll be all right in time. Now I takes leave of Jamesy now, and thinks I'll take a turn along the Medicine Creek, and here I noticed someone on the opposite bank. There's somebody, I thought, so I calls over. Boy, what you doing? I'm fishing, he calls back to me. Oh, I says, I thought you was fishing, I calls back. Now I'm a mite deaf, and I never heard the words coming out of him right. Anyway, I calls back to him. Come across you, I can't I'm got no boat. I'm thinking now, while I wait, I'm standing in the same place tall Fanny Toon crossed the creek one spring. Her mother told her not to do it, 'cause the ice was rotten, and she not could go. But she went anyhow. And her mother's watching from in the door, and all at once she see the head sticking out, and Fanny still going, mind you. He comes falling across now, and when I gets across, I see, this is old Boo. Where'd you get that old tub, I says to him. I expected it to turn up at Chiquani and you'd go shamunk into the water. But he only says, da, and he holds up the back of his hand to me and nods his head. That's a habit he's got to say he's too smart for a thing like that to happen. Well, we talks for a little about the size of the catfish he's been catching lately. Then he puts me straight on the news around. Seems like all Jacob's second daughter's thinking on getting married, he says. His first daughter's man not can get ahead so good since his cow died. Too bad to lose a good animal like that, I says. His second daughter's making a better match, but he says. Already her man has a cow, and a sack of flour, and a house, and even he's got a window in his upstairs. We talked some more about old Thomas, losing his faith. Every time he's going somewhere he calls to Bessie. Bessie, where's my pipe, he says. And Bessie would come running with his pipe. And he used to drink a little booze, says. And Bessie would say, He's bad enough when he's sober, but when he's drunk, he's unbearable. Well, drinking or not, I said, he sure could make that all fiddle talk anyhow, like, Steve boy. I mean one time they're having a kitchen sweat, and he's fiddling away and keeping time with his feet so hard, he fell off the chair right down onto the floor. But that didn't stop him, but here he is, still fiddling away, laying on his side, looking up at the people passing by. No, it's too bad he had to get buried the way he did, I says. The hole, it got dug beaming, and the box, it got stuck kind of side on, halfway down, so they left it like that. Oh, old Boris says, he always was an awkward old bugger anyhow. Now with that, I take leave of all, burro and hitch for home, not to forget to pick my bannock. For tomorrow's a busy time ahead for me, for I'm got to take up a load of length wood up to the fort now indeed, and make a big circle around by the marsh in the way and home and pick up a jag of hay. I left the butt out there and got drifted over on me, and the last time I was out I forgot my shovel at home, and I couldn't dig it out. And next week, I'll try my hand at trapping a few muskrats, I guess, for I'm getting hungry for some fresh meat. I'm thinking on all these things as I jog along what I'm got to do. As I make a turn in the bend of the rod, I run slap into Sarah bending over her cow. She's standing there wringing her hands and telling me she was taking Rosie for a visit, and she got stubborn and lays down. Sarah starts wringing her hands again, and she says to me, "My, I wish I could get her over to George's." Now with that, we both gives a tug on the rope, and the rope breaks, and Rosie takes off, bell and all, across the field and over the fence, high-tailing it. Ah, Sarah says, leave her be. She'll come back walking later on. Now the two of us walk along together now, till it comes to the gate where she lives, and I notice her all mother at the window waving at me. Sarah says to come in and have a cup of tea, and pass the time of day, so I take her up on that, because I want to thank the old lady for making me and the missus some moccasins last winter. She makes the best round-toed moccasins in the country, and folks come from all around to get them from her. She's rocking away in her old rocking chair, and I says to her, "How are you?" And she says, "Me, I'm fine." Then she wants to talk some more about the things what happened to her long ago, when she used to watch the Indians doing their sun dance. After she's done talking, I says to her, if she could get old Cutchies to get her a moose hide, she could tan it up and make me a beaded coat. And for her trouble, I'd bring her lots of colored beads from the fort when I took my lot of wood up tomorrow. She must be old, I thought, but she could remember things, although, that happened to her when she was a little girl, just as if it all happened yesterday. And then I remembered the missus. He wants some willowbillies, so I could cook a hot fire for making macaminas for her supper tonight. So I take leave of them both, and I hurry back home. I'm thinking now about the fine feather ticks she's making, and she said she'd have it ready for her bed tonight. So I'm looking for a good rest after my chores are done. Before that, but, I'm got to separate the ox and ass from the poplar in my wood fire. 'Cause up at the fort, poplar's what they burn in the summertime. I'm thinking, if I put on my load this evening, I'll get an early start in the morning. When I arrive home now, here's my gate standing wide open, and the cattle coming out. Ah, that's those boys that's from across the rod, I thought. They always do that when they come to get a pail of water. The biggest ones are real kippets and think he's smart, whatever, but he's not even. When I think of what they do, it makes me boiling mad, but I don't say nothing, because their father's not a bad old stick. He's kind of a cripple, but the fox around will have to make a bee and dig him a whale on his own place sometime. That's just what I was thinking when I shut the gate and turned around. And here's my missus calling for the willabillets on. Hurry up now, and don't keep me standing too long, she says. Time's precious, and I've not got much, she says. Inside now thinks me it's hot enough. She wants willet anyhow, but the dipper's hanging on the water pail, so I takes a quick drink and off out again before she wants something else again, you see. Now over at the stable, I throw some feed to the animals in the yard, and I go inside and feed up my yoke of oxen. I ain't got a little fixing to do, I thought, before I go tomorrow. That's a second time that yoke cracked, and I'll have to take to the bush and hoe out a new one sometime. Now it's dinner time now, and she's calling me again. She's cooking a piece of sturgeon, all John James brought over, and it sure smells good coming through the door. After eating wapples all winter, fish tastes mighty fine. Now me and the missus will make a habit to take a nap after dinner. I cut it short today, but 'cause she's got her cooking and stitching to do, and I ain't got to grease my wagon. And I've got a few more jobs I've been putting off lately, 'cause a fella gets kind of doggy in the springtime. But I'm got to finish up now, but after dinner, the afternoon goes by fast enough, and it's not time at all until we're sitting in again and eating our supper. We're got company this evening, but my youngest daughter, Angelique, was over and she boiled some butter, and she left her little girl to stay for a few days. She's good company for the missus when I'm out doing things outside. By this time, it's getting dark, so I go out and feed up my animals again and load on my wagon with wood and take an armful of split stuff into the kitchen. In the room at the front, the boss singing away about he will wash away my sins. The missus is always singing hymns to the little ones when they come over. I says to them, what kind of a sins can a little girl like Mary have? I says. But my granddaughter answered me right away, mind you, quick as a whip. And she says, I ain't got moccasins. Now with that, I go into the kitchen so as not to let them hear me chuckling. While they boil a kettle, I take down my fiddle and play a few tunes, while the missus, he puts little Mary to bed. We both wash up, and then we sit down and try out some all-end Janik's bannock. Now this time I'm getting pretty drowsy, so I bank up the fire for the night, and I make for upstairs and into bed. Now I could hear the missus spinning away at some yarn she's making. This is why I can't get to sleep, you know. Just then she calls up to me. Are you fine and comfortable in your new feather tick, Peter? Yes, I say. You'd better come and go to bed too, but 'cause I want to slop out the light. And morning comes early. This is what I'm thinking.